and please join me in welcoming Mariette Mulaire, President and CEO of World Trade Center Winnipeg, also Vice Chairwoman of the WTCA, and a Board Director of the Bank of Canada. Mariette will host our next session on creating inclusive global trade with a special guest from the World Trade Organization. Please make sure to field any questions in the Q&A box and look out for our poll as well. So Mariette, over to you.
Hey, merci, Robin. Great job. This is such a great event, and congratulations to the whole team. And this is very fun. That I've been with the World Trade Center Association for a few years now, and I've never seen us having a connection with WTO, this is all about connections that are natural. And I'm so excited that today we're going to be welcoming Bernie Kuiten from the World Trade Organization. So the World Trade Center Organization is not the same as the World Trade Center Association. We are a network of global World Trade Centers around the world that are all about connections and helping each other out and finding opportunities. But the World Trade Organization is all about dealing with the rules of trade between nations. So how important is that for us? Absolutely big time. So we're going to have a conversation today with the WTO and how it plays a role with our members, often small, medium-sized enterprises. And so we'll see what kind of support the WTO can offer us. So we'll be talking with Bernie Kuiten, who's the head of external relations of the World Trade Organization. So Bernie joined WTO in 1999, but has been head of the external relations since 2009. And before that, he worked with trade negotiations, so this guy knows what he's talking about. His current responsibilities include WTO relations with businesses, with non-governmental organizations like ourselves, with parliamentarians and intergovernmental organizations. He provides general oversight of protocol and diplomatic matters and is a very active lecturer on WTO and trade matters. He currently serves as a member of the International Geneva Council of the Swiss Network of International Studies. Please welcome Bernie Kuiten. Bonjour, Bernie.
Thank you, Mariette. Merci. That's a mouthful, and the pressure is on now because you were just saying that I'm a guy who knows what he talks about. I hope I can live up to that and that you don't look at me like another boring bureaucrat from an international organization somewhere, somehow. I'll try to very, very short and concise on saying a few words about WTO and then go into what we try to do for the private sector and particularly for smaller and medium-sized enterprises. Now, you already said, Mariette, that the WTO governs trade and trade relations between its members. We have 164 members right now. We are an intergovernmental organization. It's very important to highlight that. That means that we have governments as our members. There are no businesses as our members. There are no non-governmental organizations as our members. It's governments. We're talking about government trade policies. And the rules that we have are negotiated and they're binding, and they are attempting towards further trade liberalization. I say attempting because trade negotiators come in with one particular mandate, and it is actually to limit their own liberalization and get as much liberalization from each other. That also means that you move quite slow. Now, these rules and disciplines that we have are combined with what we call commitments. That means every member of the WTO committed to a certain level of liberalization, tariffs, non-tariff barriers, goods and services. We have agreements. Those are the rules and disciplines that cover those commitments. And that combination, provides the private sector, those who trade. I'm not a trader. You are, the ones who are listening. You are traders. I'm not. And they actually, provide you or try to provide you with predictability and transparency. Even more importantly, it tries to provide you with fair competition because that's what this organization is all about. You know what you can expect if you cross a border with a good or a service. You also know that your competitors from other countries, but also from the actual home country, face the same sort of rules and disciplines, face the same kind of obligations. The idea is that you come into the market and compete on the basis of your quality and not on the basis of, whether or not you have gotten support, whether or not you're subsidized or whether or not protected. That's a very important thing. So equal treatment for all that trade. Now, the rules that we have, the commitments the countries make can be enforced. That's why we are different from every other international organization in the world. We have a binding dispute settlement mechanism. It's a complicated mechanism. It's currently in trouble because we lost part of it because of certain actions from our members. But the system, when it's fully functioning, allows you to really enforce what the country that you're trading in has committed to, which is very important, makes a big difference. It's not perfect. It's far from perfect, I would say. One of the biggest problems we're having right now is that our rule book, which was negotiated in 1995, has not been upgraded. So we're not in the 21st century at WTO when it comes to our rules and to our disciplines. We need to reform. We need to update. For that, we do need our members. It's not something that we as WTO decide. Our members have to do that. They have to negotiate. And if they come to a conclusion, improvement, or a change, they have to agree by consensus. That means every member of the WTO has one voice and all of them have to agree. One country disagrees, it won't happen. You need to go back to the negotiating table. Now that's in a nutshell the WTO. The relevance for the private sector, I already said it's about transparency, predictability, and fair competition. It hopefully helps you to better know the rules of the game once you cross a border. I mean, it obviously does not necessarily apply when you stay within the borders of your own country, of your place of production. When you cross a border, then the WTO rules and disciplines come into play. It's highly complicated. We are a technical legal organization. Our rule book is about 600 pages long, and it's written by a mix of politicians, economists, and lawyers. And you can imagine how complicated that becomes if the end result comes out of those 3 different sources. What we try to do, and particularly the team I work, is try to help our external stakeholders. And the private sector is the most important one, maybe, but in particular right now, the biggest one. And we do that by providing training, by providing advice, and you can invite you over to come and meet our experts. I'm not necessarily an expert on all the things we deal with, but we have a lot of technical people who know. You have a specific question, you want to know more, we try to provide that for as many people as we can. We have a bit of a problem there. We're a small organization. We're about 650, 700 people. So you could say we are a medium-sized enterprise, and we're only based in Geneva. Virtual tools these days allow us to do much more, but we do have a limitation that some other international organizations do not have because they're literally placed all around the world. We particularly try to work with small and medium-sized enterprises because we know that they don't often have the means, the knowledge, or the people to concentrate on what we stand for. The big multinationals, in a way, don't need us. They have the expertise. We do see them, but they have the expertise already. We are currently having a group of countries at WTO trying to negotiate a deal specifically focusing on micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. And that deal is actually trying to provide better information, better capacity building, better trading, better access for smaller companies that actually try to cross borders. It's a facilitation. It's not a guarantee. It's a facilitation for you to do business, around the world. There's also the Global Trade Help Desk. I think other people are going to talk about that later on, set up by the ITC, ANT, and ourselves, specifically focused at many of your interests and seeing how they can actually help and advise you. Because me and my team are very small. We're trying to do what we can. We can't service everybody. Now, the idea of inclusive trade for us is very much to bring smaller entrepreneurs into our discussions. We organize, and I'll stop after that, we organize what we call trade dialogues at WTO, which is where we bring the private sector into the organization together with some of our members. And instead of going over all sorts of very difficult, complicated legal policy discussions, we literally ask companies, private sector entrepreneurs, CEOs, small, big, the smallest ones, the biggest ones, what's your problem? What are you facing when you're out there in the world? I don't want to hear the sort of complicated story. Is your product crossing that border? Is it stuck in a truck? Or are there customs, procedures that are burdensome? That started in 2016. We're doing it regular, but not regular enough, I think. That's where we hear the real story. So we don't only provide information advice, we also want to hear from many of you, what is it you face? the time today is too short to hear a lot. I hope maybe afterwards you can tell me more. But the idea is that this is maybe an opening, into the future. If you have questions, or we can get into that later on. I'll stop here, Mariette. Thank you.
Yeah, Bernie, that was a great first part. I mean, I don't think that many people really realized, I certainly didn't, how you are absolutely on the ground there to help SMEs. And you gave some of the examples there. Would you have a specific example that you can walk us through about working with an SME and kind of what was the issues and how was it resolved? Can you give us a specific, just for the audience to understand more, okay, what's in it for me kind of thing, right?
Sure. Let me give you two examples. One is is more an indication of what is done or what is asked for, and the other one is a specific company example. First example is a couple of years ago, we were approached by a variety of different beer producers. They organized themselves in an association, and they came to us and said, like, listen, we as beer producers, and we're competitors actually, we often don't really get involved in trade policy, trade rules making, because we go local, we bottle local, we sell local, we are international producers, we go into the country. But more and more, we are confronted with trade barriers, sometimes invisible ones. And we know these are multinationals. We don't know that much about WTO. Can we come to you with people from our different companies, and can we get a 2-day training on very specific parts of WTO, technical barriers to trade, sanitary standards and how they are used in relation to trade policy? And we set that up. We had I think 15 people from all the major beer producers in the world. They stayed with us for 2 days. This is the time you could still come. And we were just exposing them to all sorts of experts. And they liked it. It was very technical. They had technical people there, but it worked. That's the kind of thing we can do. A concrete example in terms of, let's say, advisor steering a smaller company in the right direction. We had a company from the United Kingdom. And this was at a time, actually today was a big day because they signed off on the trade deal. This was at a time when it was totally unclear whether the EU and the United Kingdom would come to a conclusion and continue doing business and trading in the way they have been doing when the UK was part of the European Union. This was a smaller company that produced detergents as B brands for supermarkets. So it wasn't too big. It had all its raw materials coming in from EU member states. Obviously, when they were part of the European Union, there were no borders, there were no barriers, there were no tariffs, there were no restrictions. And they called up and they said, listen, we tried to find this, but we don't have the expertise and we don't have the knowledge. If, we become, completely external and there's no trade deal, what will happen? Will we have additional costs? What are the tariffs? And they asked us, and they asked me actually, they called me up and they said, well, let me check, give me the indication. What are the products? What are the classifications? So I go to my colleagues, my experts, and they say, you look this up. EU tariffs, external tariffs on these particular products, what they are. And they gave me the information. So I went back to them and said, okay, if you will start, you're doing your business, these are the tariffs that the EU has on these 2 or 3 products. Now, if the UK government decides, without a deal, without a trade deal, to copy those tariffs, that means that you, as a company in the United Kingdom, will start paying, and these were quite substantial, 6-7%, these tariffs on your raw materials that you import to produce these detergents. So your costs will go up. And I said, what you could do, first and foremost, is talk to the UK government and find out if they are planning to do so, because it's not guaranteed. But the UK was then saying, we're going to mirror what the EU is doing, in terms of tariff barriers, non-tariff barriers. You should also contact your associations, the International Chambers of Commerce, to sort of see if they can lobby for you. I haven't heard back from the company, so I presume it was also, but that's a very concrete thing we do. It sounds very simple. Problem here is that many companies do not dare to call us, they think, oh, we're too small, they won't help us. Wrong, no, come, ask a question. I can always say no. Or we can always say, well, we don't know this, we should go there. We can try to advise you where we can. That's a concrete example.
That, I love it. First of all, you started with beer. It's a bit early where I am, but that was a good one. And the detergent. And detergent, I think that's a perfect example, Bernie, because those are the kind of questions, and we know with UK, it must have been, must have been so many questions between UK and European Union for the last few years. So obviously, you know, this is a perfect example for our audience to hear. And you did mention a little bit the misconceptions of WTO, like you mentioned that not everybody knows that you actually do this kind of consultation, that you can provide training for a specific group like you did. What are other misconceptions would you say are that people might have about WTO?
I think the biggest misconception that exists in relation to my organization, the WTO, is that many people still think that we set the rules. They really think that the WTO as an organization determines trade policies for its members. No, it's the other way around. The members decide on their trade policies and they negotiate with each other to come to agreements on where they would, you know, fix them, where they would create certainty. Tariff is 5%, okay, fix it under WTO, the tariff is 5%. I mean, it's not me or my colleagues. And there is still a lot of people that think that we do that, and we don't. There's also, therefore, companies that call us up or write to us with very specific problems. They are, you know, stuck, you know, in a procedure in another country. They want to get a license and it's being blocked by a particular ministry. They can't therefore continue their expansion, or, you know, they can't actually deliver the products they were required. It's stuck in a container. It doesn't matter. They come to us and say, like, can you solve this? And we always say, no, we can't. We are an intergovernmental organization. So what you need to do in this particular case, go to your government and your trade, you know, your trade associations, and ask them to lobby for you, and ask your government to raise that with the government of the country where you have a problem. Because imagine that we would do this. Imagine that we would set that. That would mean that we would have unlimited, and I would say very dangerous powers. Right. I wouldn't even want those. So that's the biggest misconception. We don't set those rules. We don't set those trade policies. Our members do.
That is a great clarification, because as you know, World Trade Center Association, we have members. Many of the World Trade Centers around the world offer trade services, and it's part of the core offerings that we have for our members. And one of the things you mentioned, the Global Trade Help Desk, and I know that at World Trade Center Winnipeg, the team here has taken a training that was offered by WTCA, and I think I'd like to hear a little bit more about this whole Global Trade Help Desk, because for us it was very useful to see this tool. Can you talk a little bit to the audience about the tool itself and what it can do?
Well, I can try to, but I've learned a lesson, you know, from various people that work in the journalism business, that if you don't know the answer, just say you don't know. I'm not an expert on the Global Trade Help Desk. I know it's set up. I know what it aims at is indeed to help and advise and to guide entrepreneurs in the very, very difficult policy, rules and disciplines world. But that's about my knowledge. I see Robin coming into the
Yeah, I see Robin, because I thought it was such a great connection between WTO and what WTCA has offered. So maybe Robin, you want to talk a little bit about this, because I think it's a very great tool.
Yeah, well, thank you for bringing it up, Bernie. Good to see you again. You just brought up one of my favorite topics, which is working with beer producers. And I also see you have the map of Brussels in the background. So thank you for that detail. I'd just like to mention, regarding the Global Trade Help Desk, at the end of the day, we have a session with an introduction with someone from the International Trade Center that will go much more deeper into what is this tool, how can you use it. So bear with us. Towards the end of the day, we have a session that will focus specifically on this topic. And it's a great collaboration. And I think as a WTCA, we very much look forward to working much closer with the Global Trade Help Desk, bringing the tool to our membership and to the businesses that our members work with. So it is time for questions from the audience. But before we do that, we will launch a poll. So please, there's a box on your screen. Click on there to take part in the poll with two questions. Question one is, how important is it for global trade to be truly inclusive so the system can work for everyone? The second question is, do you think you can contribute and play a role in creating a more inclusive economy? Questions from the audience. Probably, Bernie, this is for you. How does the WTO ensure intellectual properties are protected, if that's at all, with you at the WTO?
Yes, it is. I mean, we have an agreement that actually looks into intellectual property protection. We obviously don't look into intellectual property rights or patents because there is a full other organization dealing with that. What we look at is whether or not these rights or these patents and the protection are being used or misused in relation to trade. It's one of the most complicated agreements that we have, and friend and foe will agree to that. Even my IP colleagues say this is a complicated agreement, but the bottom line is it tries to ensure that, you know, intellectual property rights remain protected and are not undermined by particular trade rules or regulations. It's a very hot topic right now because we currently have a division between our members on a waiver on intellectual property rights in relation to the production of COVID-19 vaccines. And there are some members that say you should waive those rights so that we can actually get the intellectual property rights and start producing this ourselves. There are some others that are saying, no, we shouldn't do it because it won't serve its purpose, because you need the technology, you need to know how to make them, you need to have the capacity. So even if you waive these rights, it won't lead to many more, you know, vaccines being produced. So it's a hot issue right now. It's also, as I said, one of the most complicated issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. Another question is the multilateral, the trade facilitation, the discussions, is that being threatened or impacted now by COVID, by sort of this crisis, or is it business as usual, but by virtual means?
On the contrary, I mean, we actually claim an important role, and we also see that trade as such plays an important role, because we have been starting to analyze what governments are doing in relation to the pandemic in the area of trade. And in the beginning, and we're talking more than a year ago, we saw many governments installing all sorts of restrictions, particularly in terms of exporting either, you know, materials, input into, vaccines or just therapeutics and diagnostics. That has going down, but we're watching that, we're monitoring. That's one of the roles that we play. We see the other way around, obviously, that trade is being affected by the pandemic, partially because there has been growing protectionism, also because, you know, the economy as such is getting continuous and severe hits. And I think many of your members particularly do. The small and medium-sized enterprise suffer more than ever. What we're trying to do right now, and what my new Director General, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, is trying to do, she's bringing different people together, governments, producers, institutions, to see, can we identify, unused capacity? Can we improve the distribution of vaccine and overall scale things up? That's not necessarily what the WTO does, but we can facilitate bringing people together. So yeah, we are ourselves deeply involved in the discussion. Trade and health also for the future is a big issue for us. How can you ensure that trade is an enabler and not a brake on making progress, either to fight a pandemic or coming out of one? And secondly, we're trying concretely to help increase production capacity, even though we ourselves don't, as far as I know, maybe in our cellars, but as far as I know, we don't produce anything ourselves.
Yeah, well, I very much am very intrigued by the fact that you mentioned that the new Director General is making an effort to bringing a lot of different people together, and sort of maybe feeds into one of the questions here is, and maybe also for Mariette, how can the WTCA and the WTO sort of work more closely together? Because we're focusing both on facilitating international trade, creating a more inclusive environment. How can we bring the tools that are available to the SME community, which is still the beating heart of economies in most countries in the world? So Mariette, Bernie, what can we do? What can we do more?
Well, I'm listening to Bernie, and I think this is a great first step, Robin, to actually look at what each other offers. Like, we're a different animal, but the regulation and the responsibility that WTO is offering is so important for people to know. I think that the global trade help desk is something that will naturally unite us, because there's going to be information there that absolutely relates to WTO. I have a little question for Bernie, and I don't know if we have time for this, may I ask?
Of course, we have another full 3 minutes, Mariette.
Okay, so Bernie, you spoke about the pandemic and you spoke about protectionism, and as it relates to trade, do you see any other trends that, like, you know, we can talk about office space, people working maybe more hybrid from home, but that doesn't necessarily trade, but are there things that the consumer, whether it's what consumers are eating or the packaging or the, any kinds of trends that you can see that you will be looking at closer as it relates to what we've been going through in the last year and trade?
Well, one particular trend, you mentioned consumers, Mariette, and one particular trend that we've been seeing over the last few years, even before the pandemic, is a re-emerging and growing interest from the consumer movements into what we do, because obviously, trade is a purpose. You try to actually provide a product or a service to a consumer, and consumers are therefore very important. So you see a growing knowledge, a growing interest, which is a good trend. We're very much welcoming this, because I mean, if they need to have a say in this. The bigger trends, it's a bit difficult to say, because you are looking a little bit into a crystal ball here. What we find is a worrisome trend also in relation to pandemics or other kind of international crisis is difficult to explain mistrust or lack of trust in governments, in international organization, and the tendency of going by themselves or going by yourself. So it's kind of like inward looking, isolationist approach, moving away from international cooperation and from multilateralism. And you may say, well, of course you say this because you represent a multilateral organization. No, it goes everywhere. It's a concern that exists. And there is no recipe or no medicine to actually solve that. But that's a growing, a concern that we've had, and it's a problem that is growing. I don't know if you noticed that, but we see a lack of interest in working together internationally. I think the problems that we're facing right now, you cannot solve them on your own. You cannot solve them within one country. You do need to cooperate, because, as everybody always says, a virus doesn't know borders.
Yeah, and I think this is a great segment to looking at how WTCA and WTO should even more than ever work closer together, so we can better serve our SMEs.
Yeah, if I can say one thing on that, if I may, I know time is running out, is this is a very, very, very important first step. And thank you to Robin for actually reaching out and organizing it. The next steps are very simple and pragmatic. I'm a down-to-earth guy. I'm pragmatic. I say what I can do and I say what I cannot do. But what I do know is that our door is open, that we have phone numbers, that we have email addresses, you have a face, there are other faces. People are willing to help. That's the one big thing you have to understand. This is not, a bunch of gray, faceless bureaucrats that sit virtually these days in an office. No, these are people that know things, they want to share it, they want to help you. And if they see someone with a problem, they will try. And if they can't, they will say it too, but they will try. That's a very important thing. And I think that's where we can probably find ways of coordinating, communicating, working together in all sorts of different ways.
Well, thank you, Bernie. We will definitely follow up with you and Mariette. Thank you so much as well. Let's have a quick look at the poll. 73% of respondents says it is very important, and 22% says it is important for global trade to be truly inclusive, so the system can work for everyone. So I think that's a very, very interesting feedback here. And to the question, can you contribute and play a role in creating a more inclusive economy? We have 100% of respondents saying yes, that people do think they can make a difference. So I think that is very encouraging. So with this, thank you so much, Bernie, for joining us from Geneva. Mariette, of course, from Winnipeg to be here with us for this inspiring dialogue. I think you provided a lot of clarity on the work of the WTO. And as WTCA, we do look forward to continuing our dialogue and collaboration. And thank you also again for bringing up the Global Trade Help Desk. Mariette and Bernie, we will go into more detail there during our last session today. So with that, we will now move to the next session of today's program, SMEs and Thriving Markets and the Future of Trade. So again, please click on the next button to go to the next session, and we'll see you back in just a few moments.